The cockpit glass shattered at 40,000 feet. The captain was gone. The plane was diving. 312 people were screaming. But one woman in seat 9B was not. She was already standing. She had not flown in 7 years. But her call sign was 0G. And 0G never forgets. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. She was thinking about pearl buttons. Small, ivory pearl buttons running all the way down the back of a wedding dress she had never seen. Her son had described it over the phone last week, stumbling over the words the way young men do when they are trying to explain something beautiful. She had closed her eyes and smiled. Outside the window, the Atlantic Ocean sat 40,000 feet below, gray and endless and completely still from this height. The kind of view that makes problems feel small. The kind of quiet that does not come often in a life like hers. She was in seat 9B. She was at peace. Then the windshield cracked. Not a bang. Not an explosion. One sharp, hard snap. The sound of something strong reaching its limit and breaking at that exact line. Sarah's trained ear identified it correctly before her eyes confirmed it. She turned and looked toward the front of the aircraft. The cockpit door was still closed. She did not need to see behind it to know exactly what had happened. One sharp crack in the cockpit windshield glass. Then the glass spread in 3 directions at once, like a river splitting on a map. The pressure change moved through the cabin like a wall. The oxygen masks dropped from the panels above every seat in one long, rattling cascade that ran from the front of the plane to the back. From somewhere near the cockpit came a sound that was not quite wind and not quite a scream. It was both. Passengers grabbed their armrests. Someone in row 22 dropped their coffee cup. A small child in seat 14C began crying before her mother had finished understanding what was happening. Sarah Mitchell was already unbuckling her seatbelt. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Automatic. The way a body does what it was built to do before the mind catches up. 7 years. 7 years since Sarah Mitchell had been anywhere near a cockpit. 7 years of quiet mornings in Connecticut, high school physics classes, and a grief so complete it had become the permanent shape of her interior life. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that the sound was wrong. Sarah knew what it meant. And her hands were already moving. In the next 41 minutes, Sarah Mitchell would perform a maneuver that exists in no aviation manual. She would talk a 32-year-old first officer back from the edge of panic. She would calculate a descent number that no computer on that aircraft could produce. And she would keep a promise to her son she had not yet made. But first, she had to get out of seat 9B. And for a woman who had not been near a cockpit in 7 years, that was the hardest part. To understand what Sarah Mitchell did in the next 41 minutes, you need to understand what Sarah Mitchell was. Not what she is now. Not the physics teacher. Not the quiet woman with the window seat. Not the widow who grips the armrest of every aircraft she boards because the last time she was in one, her husband did not come home. You need to understand what she was before. The Blue Angels. The United States Navy's Flight Demonstration Squadron. The team that flies in formations where the wingtip gap between aircraft is not measured in yards. Not even in feet. Sometimes 3 feet. Sometimes less. At speeds above 400 miles per hour. To fly for the Blue Angels, you do not simply need to be a good pilot. You need to be the specific kind of good that exists at the very outer edge of what human hands and human training can produce. The kind of good that most pilots spend entire careers chasing and never reach. Sarah Mitchell flew 6 seasons with the Blue Angels. She was demonstration pilot number 3. The first woman to hold that position in the entire history of the squadron. She flew 4,200 demonstration hours without a single incident. Her call sign was 0G. It came from a maneuver that, before Sarah Mitchell, did not exist. A coordinated parabolic arc. The kind of flight path that produces genuine weightlessness. The kind astronauts feel. Executed not by one aircraft but by three simultaneously, flying in tight formation, for several seconds of actual zero gravity, visible to the crowd below. The physics of it were almost impossible. The margin for error was essentially zero. 1 degree of separation at the wrong moment meant catastrophe. 3 aircraft, 3 pilots, 400 miles per hour, and a gap between them you could measure with a yardstick. Sarah developed it alone. She flew the arc by herself hundreds of times over 2 years, building the muscle memory until the move felt like breathing. Until her body knew it without asking her brain for permission. She performed it publicly exactly once. At the Pensacola Air Show. A clear October afternoon. 40,000 people watching. The footage from that day still circulates in aviation training rooms. Instructors pause it. Students go quiet. Pilots who understand what they are watching do not speak for several seconds after it ends. Then 7 years ago, there was a small Cessna. A weekend trip. Sarah in the left seat, Daniel in the right seat, which he always chose because the right seat gave him the best view, and Daniel had always been a man who wanted the best view. On takeoff, a bird strike took out the engine. Not an unusual event in aviation. Not an unsurvivable one. Sarah did what any pilot with 4,000 hours does when an engine fails. She flew the aircraft. She found a field. She brought them down. The landing was hard. The NTSB investigation found no fault with Sarah's response. The investigators reviewed every second of the event. They studied the altitude, the airspeed, the available options, the field she chose. The report concluded in clear, specific language that Sarah Mitchell had performed correctly given the circumstances. Sarah read that report once. She has not read it since. Daniel suffered a traumatic brain injury in the impact. He died 11 days later in a hospital in Pensacola. He was 36 years old. Sarah was 28. Their son Ethan was 9. Sarah left the Blue Angels the same week. She moved to Connecticut. She began teaching high school physics, which suited her for one specific reason. Physics does not ask you to trust yourself with other people's lives. It is equations on a board. Momentum. Force. Velocity. Abstract. Safe. Contained. She does not talk about what she used to do. Her students know her as Ms. Mitchell. Some of them find her quietly remarkable without being able to say exactly why. The particular quality of her stillness. The way she explains concepts like force and pressure as if she understands them not as abstractions but as physical memories stored somewhere in her bones. Ethan knows everything. He was 9 when Daniel died. He has spent 7 years being the person who keeps his mother connected to the living. Calling every Sunday. Sending photographs of ordinary things. Showing up at her apartment with groceries and staying for dinner. Talking about his father the way you talk about someone important, not carefully, but honestly. When his wedding invitation arrived, he had written a small note at the bottom in his own handwriting. Please come, Mom. Dad would want you there. I need you there. She booked the flight the same day. She has regretted it every hour since boarding. She has been gripping the armrest of seat 9B since takeoff with both hands, white-knuckled and quiet, not from fear of the emergency that has not yet happened, but from the simple, suffocating fact of being a passenger on an aircraft when the last time she sat in one, her husband died in the seat beside her. She had spent 7 years telling herself she had no right to be near an aircraft again. She had 40 seconds to decide if that was still true. The cockpit door was locked. It is always locked. That is the rule, and the rule exists for good reasons. A flight attendant named Kevin, 26 years old, 4 months into his first transatlantic assignment, was standing in front of it with his back pressed against the door and his hands out and his face doing the thing faces do when protocol and emergency are arriving at exactly the same moment and protocol has not yet lost. Sarah did not push past him. She stopped. She spoke in the specific register of a woman who has given critical instructions inside loud aircraft at 400 miles per hour for 20 years. She knew exactly how much volume a message like this required. Not loud. Not soft. Precise. My name is Sarah Mitchell. My call sign is 0G. I am a former Blue Angels pilot with 4,200 demonstration hours. The pilot in that cockpit needs a descent profile that does not exist in any manual. I am the person who can give it to her. Please open the door. Kevin looked at her. 3 full seconds. The 3 longest seconds Sarah had experienced since the day she sat in a Pensacola hospital waiting room and watched the number on a clock change. Then he picked up the intercom. Then the cockpit door opened. What Sarah saw when the door swung inward. First Officer Amanda Cruz. 32 years old. 2,800 total flight hours. Both hands on the controls. Jaw clenched so tight it could crack. She was doing the right things. The aircraft was level. The altitude was holding. Her radio transmissions were coming out steady but carrying the specific weight of someone who is alone in a way very few situations produce. The weight of being the only qualified person in the room. The weight of knowing that every second of uncertainty you show is felt by 312 people sitting behind you. Behind Cruz, through the broken windshield. Captain Brett Lawson. 49 years old. Partially pulled through the fractured glass by the force of the decompression. Still alive. Held in place by his harness and by the hands of a flight attendant named Donna Sherwood, 44 years old, who was gripping his legs with everything her body had and not speaking and not asking for anything and simply holding on. Through the gap where the windshield had been, the North Atlantic was visible. Gray-green. Vast. 40,000 feet below. Completely indifferent to any of this. Sarah read the instruments in under 10 seconds. Altitude. Airspeed. Pressure differential. Structural stress indicators. The way a woman reads a room she has been inside 10,000 times before. She did not touch the controls. She sat in the observer jump seat. She picked up the secondary handset. She spoke to Cruz. Not loudly. Not dramatically. In the register of a pilot who has spoken corrections into aircraft at 400 miles per hour and knows that a voice must carry certainty the way an instrument carries data. Clean. Precise. No wasted words. No static. Amanda. I'm Sarah Mitchell. Blue Angels. 4,200 hours. I know what this aircraft needs right now. I'm going to tell you and you're going to fly it. You're already doing the hard part. Let me do the rest. Cruz looked at her for 1 second. Then she nodded. Her jaw unclenched by approximately 2 millimeters. It was enough. Sarah keyed the radio. New York Center, this is 0G aboard Delta 2247. I am a qualified naval aviator assisting First Officer Cruz. We need immediate clearance for emergency descent, 40,000 to 10,000 feet, non-standard rate, structural constraints on board. Requesting military asset coordination and priority Atlantic routing. How copy? New York Center copied immediately. The controller, Marcus Webb, 16 years of experience, a man who had heard many things on the Atlantic frequency and had never heard anything quite like this, sat forward in his chair. He had seen the Pensacola footage 3 years earlier in a training room. He remembered the instructor pausing the video and saying, quietly, "That is what precise looks like." He had not known at the time that the pilot in the footage was a woman. He had simply understood that whoever it was had done something nobody else had attempted and had made it look like breathing. He knew it again now. Same voice. Same complete absence of wasted words. He cleared the airspace ahead without hesitating. Sarah Mitchell was in the cockpit. Lawson was still suspended at the fractured windshield. Donna was still holding on. 312 people were breathing bottled oxygen in the cabin behind them. And somewhere in the mathematics of altitude and airspeed and structural physics, there was a single number that would determine weather. This aircraft reached the ground with everyone alive. Sarah had approximately 20 seconds to find it. The descent profile Sarah needed was not in any emergency procedures manual. Not because the manuals are incomplete. They are thorough. They represent decades of aviation incident analysis. They are built by careful, serious people who have studied every known failure mode. But no manual accounts for a partially ejected captain suspended in a shattered windshield frame during active Atlantic decompression with a pressure differential still building and a crosswind component rising from the northwest. The variables were specific to this aircraft, this moment, this broken glass, and one man being held to the world by a flight attendant's hands. Sarah calculated it without paper. Without instruments. In her head. Two variables. First, the pressure differential threshold. Above a certain point, Lawson's body, partially exposed at 40,000 feet, where air pressure is roughly 1/5 of sea level, cannot survive. Descend too slowly and the ongoing pressure continues tearing at the structural gap around him. The damage expands. A survivable emergency becomes something else. Second, the minimum safe descent rate for this specific aircraft variant at this airspeed. Below a certain rate, the aerodynamic forces building on the fractured windshield frame exceed what the remaining glass and frame can hold. Descend too fast and you have introduced a different catastrophe entirely. The number was 1,400 feet per minute. Not 1,200. Too slow. The pressure continues. Lawson's exposure window extends beyond survivability. Not 1,600. Too fast. The structural load on the fractured windshield frame exceeds the integrity of what remains. A survivable emergency becomes unsurvivable. 1,400 feet per minute. Exactly. Sarah had one shot at this number. She knew it was right the same way she had known the parabolic arc was right over Pensacola, not from calculation alone, but from 4,000 hours of putting her body inside aircraft and learning in her bones what they can hold and at what precise point they break. She gave Cruz the number. Cruz repeated it back without hesitation. The aircraft began to descend. 38,000 feet. Sarah called the altitude. Cruz's hands were steady on the controls. Behind them, Donna Sherwood had not moved, had not spoken, had not loosened her grip on Lawson's legs by a single degree. The aircraft moved through the Atlantic sky at exactly 1,400 feet per minute. Descending toward breathable air in the careful, specific way that Sarah Mitchell had asked it to. In the cabin behind the cockpit, 312 people were in oxygen masks. The flight attendants were moving through the rows doing exactly what they had been trained to do. Checking masks. Checking buckles. Speaking in the calm, deliberate register that passenger-facing aviation training produces. Not panicked. Not mechanical. Human and steady. In row 14, a retired paramedic named Gerald Watts had understood what was happening approximately 90 seconds into the emergency. He had quietly unbuckled his seatbelt. He had moved into the aisle. He began moving from seat to seat, checking on passengers near him, asking simple questions, helping an elderly woman in 14D whose oxygen mask had not sealed properly. Nobody had asked him to do this. He simply looked at the people around him. And he moved toward them instead of away. It lasted 2 minutes and it mattered. 35,000 feet. 32,000. The descent was holding perfectly. The numbers were clean. Cruz's hands had not shaken once. Then at 28,000 feet, the crosswind hit. 40 knots out of the northwest. Sudden and sharp and unexpected. The kind of Atlantic wind shear that appears in the data as a vertical spike and inside the aircraft as a violent disagreement between the airframe and the sky. The aircraft yawed 15 degrees off heading. Not catastrophic by itself. But 15 degrees of rotation on a fuselage with a fractured windshield frame and a partially ejected body positioned at the front of the aircraft is precisely the kind of asymmetric load that turns structural damage into structural failure. The math was immediate and brutal. Sarah called the correction before crews felt the yaw. Because 4,000 hours of demonstration flying means your body reads aircraft movement the way other people read faces. The micro-expressions. The tiny shifts. The thing that is about to happen a half second before it happens. 4 words. In the register of someone who has spoken corrections into cockpits at 400 miles per hour and knows 4 words is all the time there is. Left. Easy. Hold. Steady. Cruise executed. Her left hand moved exactly the degree required. She held exactly the pressure required. Not a centimeter more. Not a centimeter less. The aircraft came back to heading like a thing reclaiming its own balance. On the New York Center frequency, Marcus Webb exhaled loudly enough that the recording equipment captured it. He would be asked about that exhale later during the after-action review. He would say, "I knew the call sign. I knew what precise sounded like. When the aircraft came back, I had to exhale somewhere." 25,000 feet. 20,000. The pressure differential was decreasing as the aircraft descended into denser, thicker air. Lawson's position at the broken windshield was stabilizing. His color was still wrong. His pulse was present. He was breathing. Donna had not moved. Had not released. Had not asked for anything. At 18,000 feet, Sarah allowed herself one thought of Daniel. Not the landing. Not the hospital. Not the report she read once and set down and never picked up again. The moment before. The moment when the engine went silent and she looked at him and he looked at her. He was not afraid. There was no panic in his face. No accusation. Nothing but complete, unguarded trust. He looked at her the way someone looks at another person when they believe. Without question that person will handle what is coming. He trusted her completely in that moment. She had seen it with perfect clarity. She had never forgotten it. She had spent 7 years carrying the distance between that trust and the hard landing as the defining fact of her life. As the truest thing about her. He trusted her. She landed hard. He died. That gap, between what he believed she could do and what she delivered, had become the geography of her guilt. The landscape she lived inside every single day. At 18,000 feet, descending over the Atlantic, Donna's hand still locked on Lawson's legs, Cruz's hand steady on the controls doing exactly what her voice had asked, Sarah understood something she had not understood in 7 years. The trust was real. The landing was real. They are both real. They exist at the same time. One does not erase the other. She had been trying for 7 years to cancel one with the other. Trying to make the hard landing remove the trust. Or trying to make the trust somehow redeem the landing. She had been treating them as a math problem with one correct answer. They are not a math problem. They are simply what happened. Both of them. Together. Permanent and unchangeable and both entirely true. Daniel trusted her. She landed hard. He died. She is here. All of it true. All of it hers. The trust did not disappear when the landing was hard. It was still there in his face in that Cessna. Unchanged. It will always be there. She had been measuring herself against a version of events where those two things were in competition. They were never in competition. They were just her life. She did not speak any of this. She called the altitude. 10,000. Pressure nominal. Structural hold. Lawson was pulled back inside the cockpit immediately. Two flight attendants and Donna Sherwood, who did not release her grip until he was fully clear of the windshield frame, not 1 second before, brought him back to the crew jump seat. He was breathing. Alive. His pulse was present. His color was very wrong. He would spend 4 days in a hospital in Cork, Ireland, before being discharged. The note in his medical file would describe his survival as improbable. That word, improbable, was accurate. Donna Sherwood sat down on the cockpit floor. She put her face in her hands. She was not crying. She was done. The specific, complete exhaustion of someone who has held on past every point where the body knows how to hold on. Who has only arrived at the end of it now, when there is finally nothing left to hold. Sarah saw it. She put her hand on Donna's shoulder for 3 seconds. No words. 3 seconds. That was everything there was and everything there needed to be. Then she went back to the radio. Shannon Airport in Ireland had been cleared and was waiting. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway in the grey Irish morning. Their lights painted the wet tarmac in slow, alternating colors, red and white, visible from several miles out as the aircraft descended through the low cloud cover. Crews brought the aircraft in. The last 200 feet fought her. The crosswind was still present. The aircraft was not perfectly trimmed. The conditions were exactly what the conditions were. She did not land it perfectly. She landed it solidly. Both main gear touched down clean. Nose gear followed. The aircraft decelerated down the runway with the sound of the thrust reversers doing their work. Sarah watched Cruz's hands and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Cruz flew it. Sarah talked. That had been the arrangement for 41 minutes and it had held and it had worked. Wheels stopped. The cabin erupted. Sarah sat in seat 9B after everyone else had deplaned. She was looking at the seat back in front of her. The tray table was still down. Someone's coffee cup was still in the cup holder, cold, untouched since the moment the windshield cracked and the world tilted and coffee became irrelevant. Normal objects in an abnormal aftermath. She sat with them for a while. Cruz found her there. She sat down in the empty seat beside her. 9A, the window seat. The seat that had been empty for the entire flight, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. Cruz did not say thank you immediately. Instead, she said, "How did you know 1,400? Sarah thought about how to answer. She considered several honest responses. Then she said the truest one. I've spent a lot of years thinking about the difference between what a structure can hold and what breaks it. Cruz looked at her. She understood that this was not only about the aircraft. She sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "You should be flying." Sarah said, "I was." Cruz shook her head slowly. "You know what I mean." Sarah did not answer. But something in her face moved. A shift so small that only someone watching for it would see it. The particular shift of a person who has been told the truth and is not yet ready to say it out loud. The shift of someone deciding whether to let a true thing in. She called Ethan from the terminal. He answered on the first ring. He had seen the news. Delta 2247, emergency landing Shannon, all passengers safe. He had seen the name in the reports when they started naming the naval aviator who had assisted from the passenger cabin. He was crying before she finished saying his name. She said, "I'm on the ground. I'm fine. I'll be there." He said, "Mom." And could not finish the sentence. She said, "I know. I'll be there." She booked the next flight to London. Window seat. She did not grip the armrest. The wedding was held in a small church in West London on a Saturday morning in April. The light came through the high windows the way English light does in spring, pale and clean and careful, as if it is not entirely sure it is welcome. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row in a borrowed blazer, the Atlantic still somewhere behind her eyes. She had slept 4 hours. She looked like a woman who had come a very long way and arrived at exactly the right place. Ethan walked his bride toward the altar. She was wearing an ivory dress. Small pearl buttons. Running all the way down the back. Sarah looked at the dress and for a moment she could not breathe. Not from grief. From something else entirely. The particular force of beauty arriving when you are not completely prepared for it. The way a thing can be so exactly right that it stops you before you can protect yourself from it. She was smiling. A small, private smile. The kind a woman makes when she is alone with something good. At the reception, Ethan leaned close to her. He told her about the dress. He told her about a magazine. About Daniel sitting at the kitchen table when Ethan was small, 5 or 6 years old, tearing out a single page carefully along the fold. Looking at it. Then looking at Ethan across the table and saying, "Someday when you get married, this is what I want your bride to wear." Ethan had found the magazine after Daniel died. He had kept the torn page for 20 years in a small box at the back of his closet. 6 months before the wedding, he had given it to his bride and said, "I need this exact pattern. These exact buttons. This exact fabric." She had found it. She had made it happen. He had not told Sarah any of this before the wedding. He had waited. He had wanted her to see it first with her own eyes, standing in a church, in the kind of light that does not lie, before he explained what she was looking at. Sarah looked at the buttons. She looked at her son's face. She did not speak for a long moment. The church was full of gentle noise, people moving, music settling, champagne glasses meeting other champagne glasses at a careful angle. All the ordinary sounds of a good day being lived. Sarah was somewhere inside all of it and also very still. Daniel had chosen this dress before Ethan was old enough to understand what a wedding was. He had thought about this moment, his son's wedding, his son's bride, and he had wanted to be part of it in the only way a man who does not know the future can be part of it. He had left a piece of himself in a torn magazine page in a box at the back of a closet, trusting that it would find its way to exactly the right moment. It had. He was here. Not in the way that would have been easier. Not in the seat beside her. Not walking with them out of the church into the April light. But here in the way that he could be, which is its own kind of extraordinary. Sarah understood something then that she had been circling for a very long time without quite reaching it. She had spent 7 years measuring herself against a perfect landing she did not make. She had decided, somewhere inside the mathematics of grief, that the distance between what she owed Daniel and what she actually delivered was the truest fact about her. The deepest truth. The thing underneath everything else. She was wrong. Not because the hard landing did not happen. It did. Not because Daniel did not die. He did. But because the truest fact about a person is never their worst moment. It is everything they did before it. And everything they choose to do after. Sarah Mitchell flew 4,200 demonstration hours. She built a maneuver nobody else had attempted, and she flew it in front of 40,000 people, and it was perfect. She talked a 32-year-old first officer through the loneliest 41 minutes of that woman's life and brought 312 people down safely onto a wet Irish runway on a gray morning when most of those people did not yet know how close it had been. She got on a plane because her son needed her there. She let go of the armrest. Daniel knew who he married. He knew it the day he sat at that kitchen table with a small boy and a magazine and a thought about the future. He knew it in the Cessna when the engine went silent and he looked at her without fear. He trusted her not because the landing would be perfect. He trusted her because of who she was. The hard landing did not change what he knew. It never could. The pearl buttons on his daughter-in-law's dress said so in the clearest possible language. I knew. I always knew. I left this here so you would know it too. Sarah stood in the church doorway later, alone for one moment, watching the people she loved move through the good light of that April afternoon. Ethan was laughing at something his bride had just said. The sound of it traveled all the way across the room and reached Sarah exactly where she was standing. She thought about crews. You should be flying. She thought about the jump seat. The instruments. The radio. The way her hands had known, without asking, exactly what the aircraft needed. The way the numbers had come to her clean. And certain the way they always had, the way they had never stopped doing even when she had spent 7 years trying not to need them. She thought about 1,400 feet per minute. She thought about the parabolic arc 0G. 3 aircraft. 40,000 people watching from below. She thought about Daniel in the right seat. His face. The trust. She was still a pilot. She had always been still a pilot. She had simply been waiting for permission that was never going to come from anywhere outside herself. She picked up her phone. She did not search for anything specific. She simply opened a browser and typed 4 words. Blue Angels instructor positions. She did not apply that day. She did not make a decision that day, not a final one. But she read. She sat in the doorway of a small church in West London while her son danced at his wedding inside, and she read every word on the page with the same careful attention she gives to everything she does. When Ethan came to find her an hour later, he found her still in the doorway. Still reading. He did not ask what she was looking at. He just stood beside her for a moment. Then he said, "Dad would be really proud of you today, Mom." She looked up. She looked at her son's face, Daniel's eyes, Daniel's way of holding his mouth when he is trying not to show that something has moved him, and she understood that this was true. Not as comfort. Not as something people say. As a simple, accurate statement of fact. "I know," she said. And for the first time in 7 years, she believed it. Narrator: Sarah Mitchell had spent 7 years measuring herself against a perfect landing she did not make. She had decided somewhere in the mathematics of grief that the distance between what she owed Daniel and what she delivered was the truest fact about her. She was wrong. Not because the hard landing did not happen. It did. Not because Daniel did not die. He did. But because the truest fact about a person is not the worst moment they survived. It is everything they did before it and everything they choose to do after. Daniel knew who he married. He knew it in the Cessna when the engine went and he looked at her without fear. The hard landing did not change what he knew. It never could. She understands that now. She is standing at her son's wedding in a borrowed blazer, the Atlantic behind her eyes, pearl buttons her husband chose 20 years ago in front of her. And she is understanding it fully for the first time. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.